All right, joining us now, Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. Good to have you on board. You know, we hear it again and again. The Mueller report will be submitted soon. What reason do we have to believe that that might happen soon?
You know, it's really hard to say. I think when Matt Whitaker said, although he shouldn't have been talking about it, that the Mueller investigation was coming to a conclusion, that he was probably saying that on the basis of information that he had. The big question now is, are we going to get to see both the report and the underlying evidence? And the Justice Department has been sending out signals that it intends basically to employ a double standard, that even though it provided 880,000 pages at least of discovery to the Congress in the Clinton email investigation, it appears to have no intention of employing the same standard and giving the same amount of evidence to a Democratic Congress. So that would be, I think, a colossal mistake. Yeah. The department would be rightly accused of being partial, not impartial. And it would certainly frustrate our work in Congress. It would mean that we have to essentially reinvent the wheel, recreate all the steps that Mueller has gone through.
Willie Geist has a question for you from New York. Willie?
Hey, Congressman, good to see you as always. You said more than 2 years ago, in fact, in an interview with Chuck Todd on MSNBC, that you believe that there was more than circumstantial evidence that the president, perhaps himself, had colluded with Russians to win election in 2016. Do you believe that you've proven that case? And if so, what's the evidence of it?
Well, what I said was that there's both direct and circumstantial evidence of collusion of the Trump campaign with the Russians. And, you know, in the public domain, you can look, for example, at the emails that went to Don Jr. offering dirt on Hillary Clinton as part of what was described to the president's son as the Russian government's effort to campaign. Right. And his response in writing was that he would love that help. They then took an overt act in furtherance of that agreement, that conspiracy, if you will, by meeting in Trump Tower. They got dirt, but they were dissatisfied with the quality of the dirt, and then they lied about the meeting. And do you believe, Congressman, that proves collusion or conspiracy? What I've said all along, and beginning 2 years ago, as you point out, until the present date, is there is ample evidence of collusion. But whether that evidence amounts to proof beyond a reasonable doubt of criminal conspiracy, we would have to wait for Bob Mueller to determine. That is still very much my view. But whether it's the Trump Tower meeting, whether it's the information that we continue to learn, such as Paul Manafort providing polling data and not top-line data, but apparently raw data to someone linked to Russian intelligence. There aren't innocent explanations for all of this. You might have an innocent explanation for one of these things, but not the now more than 100 contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians. In that interview I referenced, you suggested the president himself, perhaps, that you'd seen more than circumstantial evidence, had colluded with the Russians. What is that evidence? Well, I'm referring to the Trump campaign. And in terms of the president's own conduct, probably the best evidence of the president's complicity as a general matter is the fact that he has been so deceptive about all of these contacts time after time. For example, the fabrication of that statement about the Trump Tower meeting, where the president apparently played a lead role, perhaps even dictating the statement to give the public the impression that this was about adoptions. That's a pretty blatant act of cover-up, and as we have seen with Watergate and elsewhere, it's often the cover-up that gets you into trouble.
I have so many questions for you. Can we do a little rapid fire here? With respect to the Mueller report being made public, there are steps that you can take. You could, for instance, subpoena Mueller to come before the committee to talk about the report. Some read elements of the report, obviously withholding national security data, from the House floor and feel like that gives them the privilege to do so. Have you explored those ideas? Are you considering them?
We're certainly considering whatever is necessary to make sure that this is not buried, that the public gets to see this report, and more than that, that we have access in Congress to the underlying evidence. So, yes, we will subpoena it if necessary. I will certainly recommend that we bring Bob Mueller in to testify, that we take it to court if necessary. And I do want to make one further point, and that is this. I fully concur with what the Speaker said regarding impeachment. Yeah. That, however, does not let the Justice Department off the hook. If the Justice Department takes the position that you can't indict a sitting president, but we're not going to share the evidence with Congress that it would need to determine whether impeachment is warranted, that amounts to immunity for the president. And when the Speaker says the evidence is going to have to be clear and compelling, That doesn't obviate the need for the Justice Department to present to Congress that evidence.
Sure. The last question is, Michael Cohen, there were what seemed to be inconsistencies in his testimony, especially around the issue of request of a pardon. We now have lawyers from his camp and from Rudy Giuliani's camp sort of conflicting over whether he requested a pardon or whether the president's people floated the idea of a pardon. Those seem sort of directly relevant to the issue of impeachment, whether a pardon was dangled. How are you going to get to the bottom of those inconsistencies, and do they trouble you, the fact that this critical witness may have not been entirely truthful during his testimony before Congress? Again.
We questioned Michael Cohen extensively about this issue, about the dangling of pardons, about communications with either the president or people on his team. We have also sought and received, in part, documentary evidence that goes to this question. We'll be releasing his transcript at the appropriate point. We may have to interview other witnesses before we do so. So the public can judge the credibility question, but as is always the case, you look for corroboration. And there may very well be corroboration of what Mr. Cohen has to say, at least in part. There are other witnesses also that we're going to want to bring in on this subject. But, you know, finally, I think it's very important not to forget that as we search for answers to the question, was the president dangling pardons before this witness or others, we can't forget that he's doing this quite out in the open.
Right.
And the fact that this is overt doesn't make it any better. Yes, if he was secretly...
Actually just numbs people to
It does.
what's happening.
The fact that, you know, we're looking into whether he was secretly doing this, secretly acting in a corrupt way to obstruct the investigation, should not blind us to the fact that he was doing this and continues to do this. Sarah Huckabee Sanders continuing to say that they're not going to take a pardon for Paul Manafort off the table.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that you agree with Nancy Pelosi and what she said on impeachment. My question, if you are able to view the entire contents of the Mueller report and it does not contain that compelling information, should that be the end of this conversation about Russia?
It may be the end of the conversation about impeachment, but whether this president criminal or not, whether there's a case for...
Should it be the end of the... You think it should be the end of the conversation about impeachment?
Well, if there's insufficient evidence in the Mueller report, and we're not able to produce sufficient evidence in our own investigation, that ends the inquiry, there may be grounds for removal from office, or there may be grounds for indictment after he leaves office that the Congress discovers. One of the issues that we're looking at, which the Mueller report may not cover, is whether the Russians were laundering money through the Trump Organization. Our predominant concern in my committee is this president compromised by a foreign power? And, you know, just to give one very graphic illustration that may or may not be criminal, but was deeply, deeply compromising, the president was trying to negotiate the most lucrative business deal of his life during his presidential campaign, concealing it from the public, trying to get the Kremlin's help, and knowing that if he crossed Putin, he would never get that money. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And when it was discovered, his answer was, well, why should I miss out on those business opportunities? It may still be the view of this president that if he's not reelected, why should he miss out on that Trump Tower deal? And that may stay his hand when it comes to confronting Putin the way we need a president.
So many questions. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much.